All right, today we're peeling back the comic book pages to get to the incredible story of Stan Lee. You know, the man who co-created an entire universe and somehow became a legend himself. But this is really the story of how all of that almost never happened.
I mean, it's almost impossible to imagine our world without Marvel, right? But the entire thing, as we know it, came so dangerously close to just fizzling out. It all hinged on one man, at one of the lowest points in his career, who was just about ready to give up on his job and the whole industry.
So to really understand the legend, you have to meet the man first. And here's the thing. He wasn't Stanley. Not yet. He was Stanley Martin Lieber, just a kid from Manhattan with a totally different dream.
Stanley grew up during the Great Depression. I mean, this was a time of unbelievable hardship. He was born in 1922, and he watched as the average American family's income just plummeted by a staggering 40%. His dad was a dress cutter who could barely find steady work. That was the world that made him.
He was this kid who just devoured books, you know? And his big ambition? It wasn't about creating superheroes. Not at all. He wanted to write serious literature. He dreamed of writing the next great American novel. Comics? That was just supposed to be a side gig, a temporary job he got when he was a teenager.
And this really gets to a core insecurity he had. See, back then, comics were seen as cheap, disposable junk for kids. Stanley was genuinely embarrassed to have his name on them. He wanted to save his real name, Stanley Lieber, for the important books he was sure he was going to write someday.
So when he wrote his very first piece, it was just some filler text for a Captain America comic in 1941. He signed it Stan Lee, just a simple play on his first name. It was basically a throwaway pseudonym he could hide behind until his real writing career took off. Little did he know, that name would become more famous than he could ever possibly imagine.
Okay, so fast forward to 1961. After 2 whole decades in the business, Lee was completely burnt out. The industry was stale, he was tired of writing the same old boring stories, and he was ready to quit. For good. And honestly, this is where the story of Marvel probably should have ended, if not for one crucial conversation.
That was the challenge that came from his wife, Joan. She basically told him, look, before you quit, why don't you just write one comic that you're actually proud of? Write the kind of story you would want to read. What's the worst that can happen? They fire you? You want to quit anyway. It was like a creative lifeline.
And so, he did it. He teamed up with the legendary artist Jack Kirby, and together they created a team of superheroes who were anything but perfect. They were a bickering, dysfunctional family who just happened to get superpowers. They were flawed, they were real, they were human, and they changed everything. The success of the Fantastic Four wasn't just a hit. Oh no, it was a full-blown revolution. It was the green light Stan needed to just shatter all the old rules and completely reinvent what a superhero could be. Think about it. Before Marvel, heroes were, well, perfect. They were these flawless gods walking among men. But Stan Lee's new characters? They had bad tempers, like the Hulk. They had crippling vanity, like Iron Man. And they had overwhelming self-doubt, like Spider-Man. They worried about paying the rent. For the first time ever, readers could actually see themselves in these heroes.
And this new way of thinking just unleashed one of the most incredible creative bursts in the history of pop culture. Just look at this list. In the span of a few short years, Lee, along with geniuses like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko, co-created a pantheon of characters that would go on to define modern mythology. It's just staggering.
So how did they do it all so fast? Well, part of the secret sauce was their unique workflow, which got nicknamed the Marvel method. Basically, Stan would give his artists a rough plot. The artist would go draw the entire story, and then Stan would come back in and write all the dialogue and captions to fit the finished art. It was fast, it was dynamic, but it was also a little complicated.
And here's the crucial thing. This method led to some pretty intense debates about who really created what. Lee was the big picture ideas guy, the one who was pushing these brand new concepts of flawed heroes and a connected universe. But artists like Kirby and Ditko, they were absolutely indispensable co-creators who visually built these worlds and often plotted the stories panel by panel. It was a true, and yeah, sometimes tense, collaboration.
But making heroes relatable wasn't just about giving them personal problems. No, Lee also insisted that their stories had to reflect the real world, with all of its messiness and social issues. This was his guiding philosophy, right here. He truly believed that comics couldn't just exist in some fantasy bubble. They had to talk about what was happening in the news, on the streets, in the culture. It really showed how much he wanted to elevate the whole medium. And you can see this everywhere.
Iron Man, he was born directly out of Cold War anxieties about the arms race. The Hulk was a terrifying allegory for the uncontrollable power of atomic radiation. And get this, in 1971, Stan wrote a Spider-Man story about drug abuse, openly defying the industry's censorship board to do it. But maybe the most powerful example of all was the X-Men.
The whole concept of the X-Men, a team of mutants hated and feared by the very world they're sworn to protect, that wasn't just a cool sci-fi idea. It was a direct and powerful metaphor for the civil rights movement. The deep ideological conflict between the peaceful integrationist Professor X and the militant separatist Magneto, that was a clear reflection of the real-world debates between leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Comics were definitely not just for kids anymore.
So, after completely redefining an entire industry, Stan Lee starts this whole new chapter in his life. He begins to transform from a writer and editor into the public face of Marvel, a global ambassador for these worlds he helped bring to life.
He moved up the corporate ladder, eventually becoming publisher. Then, in the 80s, he moved out to California to try and get Hollywood interested in making movies about his characters. And while that took a little while, well, we all know how that story turned out. He became an executive producer on the films and, most famously, the absolute master of the movie cameo. His little winking appearances became this beloved tradition for fans everywhere.
And through it all, he would sign off his columns, his letters, and his public appearances with this single, unique word that just became his trademark.
Excelsior. What does it even mean? It's Latin for ever upward. And for Stan, it was so much more than a catchphrase. It was his whole philosophy. It was this message of always striving, of optimism, of reaching for something greater. It perfectly captured the spirit he put into his characters and shared with millions of readers.
So, in the end, what's Stan Lee's real legacy? You know, he never did write that great American novel he dreamed about as a kid. Instead, he co-authored a modern American mythology. He gave us a universe that teaches us that our flaws don't have to define us, that we can find strength in our struggles, and that even in a world of gods and monsters, the most powerful thing you can be is human. Ever upward.